For thousands of years, civilizations have emerged and fall. On previous videos, we try to help you with engineering your civilization. On this video, we will try to find a way to avoid the pitfalls of a civilization. So, how do you stop your civilization from falling? First and foremost, avoid war at all costs. Do you know what preceded the fall of major civilizations? War? So how do you avoid war? Build a strong military. It might seem crazy, but one of the ways to avoid war is having a strong military. It's like how nobody messes with the big muscular dude with a martial arts training. So the best way to win a war is to never shoot your weapon. By its proximity to other power centers alone, check the first video on this series if you don't know what I'm talking about. Your civilization is immune to wars. So just don't go out of your way invading other places looking for a war and you will be okay. The second factor that destroys a civilization is an economic collapse. So what causes an economic collapse? And how can you avoid it? There are two ways your economy could collapse based on two conditions. The first is if your currency is not the reserve currency of the globe, in which case your economy would collapse by economic warfare through sanctions and trade restriction, where the nation or central bank that controls the reserve currency restrict you from using that currency, which crumbles your trade and prevent you from acquiring goods you need to build your civilization. This could get worse if you're on a trade deficit, which means you purchase more goods than you sell on the international market. This will lead to an economic default, high inflation, and inevitably the collapse of society and government. So how can you avoid this? Become the reserve currency of the globe. But this is not an easy task to accomplish. Since 1450, there have only been 6 different world reserve currencies. That is one reserve currency every century, and each currency loses its position as the world's reserve currency after a major event. Usually a war, the holder of the reserve currency has lost. So, how does one become the holder of the world's reserve currency? Simply be the first. You have to innovate something the rest of the world desperately need and are willing to purchase. For the Portuguese, it was innovation in navigation. For the British, it was the first industrial revolution coupled with having the biggest navy in the world. For United States, it was the Second World War and innovation in nuclear power and arms manufacturing. So after having innovate and mass-produce this product, the world needs and dominating world trade. The second factor is wait until the holder of the reserve currency to fall. If you could, avoid war with them, but most probably they won't go down without a fight. So get ready for a war and apply the lessons from the art of war. Sometime soon, we will make a video on what lesson can we learn from the art of war and apply on our personal life, so make sure to subscribe. Now that you have become the world's reserve currency holder, in order to stay that way, you need to do 2 things. The first is avoiding going to economic war with a nation that is not as powerful as you. The one thing everyone hates is a bully. So don't be a bully and use your position as the reserve currency as a tool to bend other civilizations to your will. Or they will abandon your currency on international trade and leave you less powerful. The second thing is, don't be lazy and offshore your manufacturing to other places in search of cheap labor. You have to resist the desire to be greedy and make the most money while spending the least. So keep manufacturing jobs for yourself, even though they are high-paying, and increase the cost of production and purchase. Also, avoid high government borrowing and spending. I'll use the metaphor of cleaning your house. Have you ever cleaned your own house and invite some people over and see how they disregard the cleanliness of the house and dirty it up? That is what government spending is in a nutshell. Since the people who spend the money don't work to acquire it, they are careless in spending it. This inevitably results in inflation and makes living difficult for the working class. This, in turn, will certainly lead to revolt and destabilize your civilization. So let your governments run on the money it makes through taxes and avoid printing money. If you do all these things, your economy will be stable and immune to shocks, which ensure you civilization's prosperity and durability. These were the pitfalls you can avoid. But there is one pitfall you can't, which most certainly will result on the downfall of your civilization: disillusionment. Disillusionment is the undisputed #1 destroyer of civilizations. So how does one reach disillusionment? We can see this in terms of generations. But seeing this in terms of generations like the fourth turning theory, we'll fall short of seeing the full picture of disillusionment by trying to fit it into an American historical narrative, rather than it being part of a human experience that is not limited by an 80 to 100-year period. So, what causes disillusionment? After you set up your civilization, comfort might be a long ways away. But once your civilization develops, enough comfort becomes the norm, and the generation which grows up in comfort and luxury began to question the validity of values and traditions which brought about the development and luxury they're enjoying, and in an act of rebellion it forsakes those values. Check out the previous video on this series on the importance of values and embrace distractive ideas. That's what happened to the Greek and Roman civilizations. They forsake their culture, religion, and customs for individualism and hedonism, which result in a cultural decay and produce lazy and weak populace with an entitlement complex. That results in large entitlement programs by the government. This destroys entrepreneurship and leads to an economic collapse. These phenomena best described by generational terms. Hard times produce strong man. Strong man produces good times. Good times produce weak man, and weak man produces hard times. These could be seen right now in two different parts of the world, which are going through two different phases of the same phenomena. While in the West, we're seeing a cultural decay that results from a century of prosperity that comes after the Second World War, which produced an entitled generation who forsake those values that produce the prosperity, taking for granted and destroying the culture and system that it inherited from its hardworking forefathers. On the East, we're seeing the opposite. From China to India to Singapore, we are seeing strong man, hard at work and producing good times. These countries were colonies of the West in the early 20th century and as symbols of poverty in the latter years of that century after they gained their independence. But after the turn of the third millennium, we're seeing the renaissance of these nations, which are self-sufficient civilizations unto themselves. We're seeing them producing their own unique culture to forsake of Western-dominated culture, building on their own unique values, and this has led to them succeeding in establishing strong economies. These examples show history being cyclical and the human experience being rhythmical, following similar pathways even though the people and environment and situations might differ. The generation that comes out of hardship learns the importance of hard work and Puritanism, and this generation will cultivate peace and prosperity based on those two values. This generation will give birth to the children of plenty that never saw hardship and forsake the values of hard work and traditional moral standard for excess of hedonistic pleasure. This undoubtedly will give birth to an economic collapse and social unrest, and in worst cases, a war which destroys the system the first generation built and the second one ignored. The fourth generation will begin the painstaking process of rebuilding, and so on and so on. So what can you do? Most probably you can't do anything to avoid this fate. If you got any ideas how to avoid this fate, put them in the comment. Most importantly, remember this is based on a fictional scenario we come up with on the first episode, so don't worry yourself about it too much. Make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you on another topic on the next video. Enjoy the rest of your day.